Welcome to Resume Assessment, a TK20 study of before and after resumes. This short tutorial will help to prepare you for participation in this resume assessment process. Before we go any further, I want to thank you for your participation. I'm humbled by the fact that so many of you have been willing to work with me and collaborate on this project. You're definitely making a difference in helping me assess the effects of one of the most heavily utilized services that I provide, resume development. Without a doubt, resume development is the crux of many other areas of career services. So it's very important for me to evaluate the effectiveness of my work with students in this area. So the question might arise, how will I be evaluating these resumes? All resumes will be evaluated using a 3-point scale. 3 will be the highest score, correlating with the descriptor very good. 2 will be the middle score, correlating with the descriptor adequate. And 1 will be the lowest score, correlating with the descriptor needs improvement. You will also be assigning that 3-point score for 3 criteria in the evaluation process. First is appearance and readability, second will be content and persuasion, and third will be correctness. You will also be receiving a resume evaluation rubric, and I recommend that you take a look at this and use it as a guide throughout the scoring process. It outlines the 3 criteria I've already discussed, as well as the scoring options. It's something you definitely will want to refer to throughout the course of your participation, and it's something that I think will be a very good guide for you. Furthermore, in the slides that follow, we'll be looking at the 3 scoring criteria in more detail, and I'll be giving you some examples of the different possible scores for each criteria. The first evaluation criteria that we'll look a little more closely at is going to be appearance and readability. Ultimately, appearance and readability comes down to the idea of how the resume looks and how easy it is for the employer or the person reading it to discern what information is important from it. In looking at the appearance and readability, you'll take into account elements such as white space, horizontal and vertical spacing, bullet points, boldface type, the use of italics and or underlining, the use of capital letters, the use of font and sizing, and the use of consistency across parts. Ultimately, all these elements are going to be something that the job seeker should be doing to highlight his or her information and make it very easy to read. An employer only has a few moments to look at each resume, so the information needs to be presented in such a way that it looks good and is very easy to read. It shouldn't be something that looks like a novel or prose. The slides that follow will be outlining some example resumes and some scores that correspond to a 1, a 2, and a 3 for appearance and readability. Before we get started with looking at some sample resumes, I just wanted to point out something that you're going to see anytime that you're looking at a resume for me, whether it's in this tutorial or in the TK20 program. Any resume I'm sharing with you to evaluate, you're going to see that the personal information for the job seeker or student has been blocked out with a black rectangular box. This is obviously done to protect the identity and the privacy rights of our students, but it's also done to protect the objectivity of the study. So, getting back to the evaluation criteria, and in particular the appearance and readability, if we were to look at a resume that would receive a score of 1 for appearance and readability, this resume sample that you have in front of you would be a prime example. If you look at the resume carefully, you'll see that there's an imbalance of white space. There's just everything is kind of less justified, and you'll see there's a lot of white space left available on the right-hand side of the resume. Additionally, you'll see that there's a lot of sameness. Everything runs together. There are no distinctions made between the different parts of the resume, and even though it really does include most of the information, that information isn't packaged or presented in such a way that it's easy for a reader to understand it or find it. Therefore, this resume scores a 1. This next resume sample would be a good example of one that would score a 2 for appearance and readability. Just looking at the resume, you can recognize that there's a much better use of white space. The text is spread both horizontally and vertically across the page so that there's not everything clumped in one area. Additionally, there's a much clearer delineation of the different parts of the resume. You can see that there's some boldface print and all caps for the different sections, so it's much easier for someone looking at the resume to be able to discern or figure out what's in each part. There's also, obviously, because of the space between each job, a clear delineation between jobs. The problem with this and why it's a 2 and not a 3 would be that there's still too much text. It's still too prose-like for each job, in that each job is almost like its own little paragraph. So this is one that would score 2 for appearance and readability. This third sample resume is one that would score a 3 for appearance and readability. And it's very quick when you look at this to understand exactly why. There's an excellent use of white space to help separate the parts. Additionally, the sections for each part of the resume are very clearly delineated by lines, by the use of boldface all capital letters. It uses italics throughout the resume. There you'll see the use of bullet points and short snippets, whether they're for the skills or whether they're for the responsibilities on a particular job. It's very, very easy for an employer to look at this and have a very clear idea of what the student or the job seeker has in regards to skills, education, work experience, even volunteer experience. So the text in all parts is very easy to read, and it's laid out in such a way that it helps the employer find information very easily. That's why it scores a 3. The second criteria that we'll be looking at as you score and evaluate these resumes will be content and persuasion. Ultimately, what this boils down to is, what does the resume say? What information and what content is in there that will help to sell the job seeker, that will demonstrate his or her skills, education, experience, and other relevant details. The resume should include a section for skills. It could be listed under different names, a section for education, and a section for work experience. Now, a job seeker might choose to have other sections if they're appropriate, things such as volunteerism or awards or things like that. All the sections that are in the resume that utilize time should put that in reverse chronological order. So work experience or volunteerism or whatever the case may be should always start with the most recent element and work backwards. Likewise, the job seeker's qualifications in this resume should be very easy to find and should be clearly evidenced and demonstrated. And one final note with content and persuasion is that a resume today shouldn't have irrelevant, antiquated elements such as job objectives or references or any kind of mentions of references, such as references available upon request. Those are elements that just don't belong in resumes today. In regards to the criteria of content and persuasion, this sample resume would receive a score of 1. I think if you look at the resume in a little bit more detail, you'll understand exactly why. First of all, there's no skills section. And how am I, as the employer then, supposed to know exactly what the job seeker brings to the table if there's no skills section? Second, because there's not a clear delineation of the work experience section, it's really difficult for me as an employer to sort of seek out or look for and find the skills, experience, and qualification that the job seeker has. Ultimately, the job seeker just doesn't really do a good job of selling himself for the job. He doesn't include enough information, and he doesn't present it in such a way that that content is clear to me. That's why it receives a score of 1 for content and persuasion. This sample resume would also receive a score of 1 for content and persuasion, but for slightly different reasons. First of all, it includes a job objective, which we've talked about before as being antiquated, just like references, so they should be left off of resumes. Second, this resume just generally lacks depth. Even though it has an education, a skills section, and even an experience section, it really doesn't give enough information for the job seeker to sell himself appropriately. Such a short resume is not going to be very persuasive to an employer. This next resume is a good example of a score of 2 for content and persuasion. If you look at it, it generally has very good content. One of the problems with it, however, is that it tends to put its education section prior to the skills section, and ideally I would teach students to put their skills section first in most cases. Ultimately, I want students to put the most relevant information first, and in most cases for students that's going to be the skills section, the thing that's going to be able to sell them for the position first, and then typically education second, and then their work experience third. So the order with this is just slightly problematic. So as you look at different resumes, think about what's most relevant and what's least relevant. Generally, the resume should move from most relevant to least relevant in overall format. Finally, this resume scores a 2 instead of a 3, also because it's a little bit difficult to pick out some of the skills because they're grouped into different sections. There's a section called skills and a section called languages, and then there's something related to associations. So it's not quite as clear to figure out exactly where those skills are coming from and where some of the qualifications are. So the grouping is slightly problematic and makes it a little harder for an employer to discern exactly what skills the employee brings to the table. This next sample resume is another one that would score 2 for content and persuasion. Ultimately, it's a very good resume, If you look at it, it very clearly outlines the professional skills and training, the education, the work history that the job seeker brings to the table. The job seeker does a very nice job of using bulleted points to outline what his responsibilities were at all of his previous positions. The only problem or drawback really is just the fact that the professional skills and training section just doesn't have enough depth. And that's really what keeps it from becoming a 3 as a resume. Ultimately, it's at a 2 because that section needs more development. This sample resume is one that would receive a score of 3 for content and persuasion. It's basically done everything that all the other resumes have fallen short of in regards to content persuasion. It has a very well organized and detailed summary of qualifications. Included in that summary of qualifications are not only an overview of the skills and experiences, but also transferable skills, those skills that can be transferred from one job to any other job. It has a very clearly outlined education section with all the relevant information, and it also has a work experience section that is very clearly outlined and has all the information necessary to demonstrate the work history, the experiences and responsibilities that the job seeker had in all of his previous work experiences. The sample resume is also one that would score a 3 for content and persuasion. And there's an important distinction I want to make with this resume because it wasn't clear in some of the other samples we've looked at. Please understand that a resume can be more than 1 page in length and still be a very good resume. There was a myth that was propagated as a result of the Great Recession that a resume could only be 1 page in length, and that really is something that's not true. A job seeker that has more work experience or has had more time in the workforce can certainly have a resume that's 2 and maybe even some rare instances 3 pages long and still be very successful. So please don't judge a resume based entirely upon its length. Having said that, this resume has other reasons why it is a 3. If we look at this, this is what's called sometimes a skills resume, and it's broken down by some specific skills that are related to the job description. So if we look here, we see things like event planning experience and then a list of bullet points that relate to that, fundraising experience and then a list of bullet points that relate to that, and I could go on and on. What happens in a situation like this is the job seeker is creating a resume that's tailor-made for a specific job and trying to get the attention of the employer by saying, look, these are the skills you want, these are the skills that I have. So it's going to be very targeted to a specific job. This case, the student was actually someone who didn't have a lot of work experience but had a lot of volunteer experience. So she tried to not only highlight her skills but also some of the related experiences that would help to qualify her for the job, some of the professional presentations she had done relating to the job she was applying for. So this resume scores well because it does a great job of selling the candidate based upon what she brought to the table. And ultimately that's what we need to do when we're talking about content persuasion and doing a good job with a resume. The third and final evaluation criteria for the resume will be correctness. Ultimately that boils down to the idea of avoidance of mistakes in spelling, grammar, mechanics, capitalization, and or usage. To earn a score of 3, a resume should have no to very few errors. So the resume should basically be perfect. No errors, maybe 1, 2 at the most to earn a score of 3. To earn a score of 2, there are going to be a few more errors than that, but in most cases it's probably not going to go much beyond 5 or 6 to earn a score of 2. And then anything beyond that would probably earn a score of 1 in regards to correctness. So that wraps up the resume tutorial for this assessment activity. If you have any further questions about the scoring of resumes, about using TK20, or anything else relating to the process, please feel free to contact me at any of the following options. You can give me a call at campus extension 513219. You can email me at careeryork@hack.edu, or you can stop by Leader Room 105 and ask me any questions you might have. Again, I offer my sincere appreciation for your taking part in this process, and I look forward to getting the results and being able to share these with you. Thank you very much.